Hello. I'm going to sit, as you're also all sitting. I hope you don't mind. And I need this gadget. Yes, thank you. As said, I'm going to talk about a desert island after having talked about some other things before. I would like to thank the organizers of Biotoopia for giving me this opportunity to talk to you today. I would also like to thank Andreas for saying most of what I have to say already. I hope that some of what I have to say will be a little bit different from his perspective. So, I think the reason why we are all here is a kind of an ongoing crisis, not only in how the world is, not in the politics, economics, but also in the way how we think about the world, and in particular the very anthropocentric view of how we have conceptualized ourselves, how we're seeing ourselves and everything around us. Something that has been inherited from the Western philosophical tradition mostly, but which has also proved to be remarkably successful. Successful in answering loads of questions that humanity has asked itself over the centuries, and it has also provided us with, nice gadgets. All this technological progress is partly reliant on this anthropocentric worldview that we are now saying that is no longer as good as it is. When we look at what is happening in philosophical and critical thought, we can call it an ontological turn. The question of what it means to be, what are the actual existence, and so on, which was formerly considered to be a mostly sort of philosophical thing for professional philosophers who are in, stuffy cabinets, so large volumes and things, and they talk to each other, and then they refer to, oh yes, Hegel, yes, oh no, Heidegger, and all that. But now the ontological turn has penetrated, for example, social studies, ecological thought, and many other spheres, also medical thought, for example, where it was usually not something, very important before. We have a crisis. The question is philosophy complicit in this crisis? Is it partially a fault of philosophers that what is happening is actually happening? And I'm afraid the answer is yes, because the naturalization, the adoption of this received worldview, the ontology which is normally called realism, has produced the regimes of being that we call capitalism for society, for the economy, and also the idea that the self-realization of a singular human being has to go through production of things, well, sometimes we call it more beautifully creation of things, but also through possession of things. You need to acquire this and that and that and that in order to be a self-realized, really successful human being. And evidently also the consumption of things, that we are what we consume. We buy these things and we use them so that we would be, what we should be. Now, I said realism. I think this word actually has three meanings, which are confused without good reason. The first is a meaning of the word coming from the 19th century, mostly designated for artistic and literary styles. There were realistic novels which started to depict life as it actually was, instead of speaking about, great visions, romantics, all of that. And also, paintings which did not make things more beautiful, did not instill into them stuff that wasn't actually there. So here we have, on the picture, we have a realist painting depicting a lady reading a realist novel, in all likelihood. But philosophically, the word has a longer history. Realism is one of the two main currents of scholastic philosophy of the Middle Ages. Realists were the people who thought that universal principles and ideas were actually real, that they had some kind of an existence which was independent of the human minds. And they were opposed to by other people who were called nominalists, from the word nomen, name, who said that, no, these general concepts, they're just names that we human beings are giving to them. So there is no redness out there. It's the word red that we use to designate objects that share the capacity of reflecting light at a certain frequency. And the third meaning of the word realism is when we say, well, be a realist. Don't aspire for too much. Have just a little bit so that you could be satisfied, and also your ambitions, they should be realistic. And when we speak of realpolitik, for example, then we also say, well, let's be realistic. We have to deal with these dictators. They're not going anywhere, so we give them a little bit. Give them a country or something so that they could be satisfied for the time being, and then we can go on with our stuff as usual. Now, we currently see many philosophers identifying themselves as realists. They claim to have the outlook of the literary critical realism, where they endorse the view of the scholastic realists, thinking that universals are somehow, or concepts are actually real. And unfortunately, they also make the disruptive or destructive discourse of realism possible with this move. Now, when we think about ontology as we have inherited it, and also these new forms of realism, then there is one particular school that stands out for saying loudly and clearly that the anthropocentric viewpoint has to be overcome. That we no longer should look at things or look at the world from the point of view exclusively of human beings. That we should grant the objects more space, so to say. And they, for example, they have broadened the scope of what it means to be an object. Graham Harman, who is one of the most vociferous proponents of the school, says, well, fire is also an object. Or if we have an amount of water and it freezes, then the water was a different object, and the ice that emerged as a result is a different object. They're not the same object. There is no continuity there. They are object-oriented ontologists. They are against gradualism, saying that not everything that happens is important, so we shouldn't pay too much attention to it, and we just should speak about what is really important, which are objects. They criticize the attitude of so-called undermining, or saying the alleged viewpoint of certain thinkers of trying to reduce everything into its constituents, and also what they say overmining, saying that everything is just a manifestation of some general principle at work or some network or something. And they also claim that sometimes these happen together, which would be something called duo mining. Object-oriented ontology thus claims that things have a quasi-autonomous subjectivity, that they have kind of an agency of their own, which is why quite a few ecological thinkers have picked this up and have endorsed object-oriented ontology as a sort of good way of looking at the world, which promotes ecological thought. The point I'm going to make is that this attempt is not successful in my mind. I think that object-oriented ontology tacitly reinforces the point of view of the structures which have been produced by the human gaze, and it also always relies on binary distinctions, which is maybe not always the good thing to do. Well, and now for a moment of shameless self-promotion. I was hoping that this book would be out by now. Unfortunately, it still isn't, but it's going to be there maybe in a week or 2 weeks, Being in Flux, which is an extended presentation of a processual ontology, which has almost no use for objects at all, and also shows how, when we think of ourselves, what the object-oriented or anthropocentric gaze is doing to our view of ourselves, and providing us with some arguments or a discourse, a vocabulary of how things could be done otherwise. So the rest of my talk is going to pick up a few arguments from this book, which I hope you will at some point have time to read. What does it mean to exist? Is there a difference between the meaning of the words being and existence? It seems there is. Western thinkers well, since St. Thomas Aquinas, have started to make this difference, and the above-mentioned Hegel and Heidegger, for example, both elaborate on this. In general, when existence is being talked about as apart from being, it means kind of like being there, being determined, taking a form, becoming determinate. So it's one thing to be, and quite another to be something in particular. To be something in particular would be to exist, and just to be would be, well, you needn't exist to be. Now there's a question. What exists is embedded. What is absolutely. What exists is not absolutely. When we speak that the absolute exists, we have already determined it. We have placed it into a kind of a vocabulary of existence. Therefore, it is no longer absolute or independent from everything else. Another way to put it would be to be is free of charge, but to exist, when you exist, there is always a meter ticking. You're becoming older, you're approaching death, you're approaching the date when you have to pay your rent, you're approaching lunchtime, which means you're hungry or you need some energy, and so on. There is always a kind of relationship of costs and benefits. You absorb energy and you give it out. Even if you're a plant, existence is still not free of charge. You have to acquire nutrients from the soil. You have to, give oxygen to others, and so on. Maybe it is free of charge to exist as a stone. No, not really. You're being gravitated toward the earth, and other things, minute, but still are being gravitating toward yourself, and so on. So. If we have univocal being, one kind of being for all, we still have to contend with multiple existences. So to anything that is, the word to be applies in the same sense, but to exist means to take some particular form among many very different ones. When we now think of what it means to become determinate, to become somehow, concrete, a concrete existence, then perhaps we could define to exist as to be caused and to be a cause of something else. Taking form is always a sort of a stage of a process. You come from somewhere. If you exist, you come from somewhere, and you're headed somewhere else. When you come from somewhere, this means that you have a past. You are headed somewhere else means you have a future. You have many possible futures. So what doesn't cause, what is not the product of anything else, and is not producing anything, does not exist. Well, we may say that technically there can be something that is not causing, but we're not seeing it. And when we say God exists, this sentence is certainly true in this sense, but not in the sense that the religious people think. The religious people would say that God exists means there is an entity called God somewhere, which is, doing stuff. No, we could say God exists because it is caused. The concept of God is caused by the need of people to invent someone responsible for the entire clusterfuck that is going on, all the time. Somebody has to be there as a certain explanatory entity. Also, we can say that God really causes things to happen. For example, supermarkets to blow up. When someone, in the hope of meeting God, immediately goes there, with a bomb. God has also caused some pretty nice things, like people helping others, acts of charity, sisters of mercy. Also, because of their belief in God, they think that they would do things, or they are going to do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So God, the idea of God in their minds, has caused these acts to happen. Now, I said possible futures. Everything that we do, everything that happens at any given moment is going to alter the future in some little, small way. At every particular moment, what we can say is that there is a bounded infinity of futures that might happen. What does it mean, a bounded infinity? Infinity means unbounded, right? Infinity means there is you can't really enumerate all the possibilities that are going to happen. But when we think of this, you were probably all taught at school that on a line of 1 centimeter, there is an infinity of points. On a line of 2 centimeters, there is also an infinity of points. It seems fairly obvious that there are twice as many points on a line of 2 centimeters than there are on 1. No, there are exactly as many, that is, infinity of points on both of these. So a bounded infinity is an infinite number of futures that might happen. But there are some futures that just simply cannot happen because they are not on the circle. They are not points on this circle represented here by the painting of Kandinsky. And therefore, there are things that we can imagine, but which absolutely cannot happen, which are logically, physically, and in all other ways impossible. They are not on the circle of bounded infinity. But even things that could have happened a few minutes ago still cannot happen because of what has happened in between. Everything that we do, everything, all our being, every single present moment is a sort of a lens which projects a multiple coming together of heterogeneous causal flows into a bounded infinity of futures, but the bounded infinity is not stable. It is always changing a little into one direction or another. Everything that we think, say, do, and so on, slightly alters the way how the world could be. So this is what is meant by possible futures. Now, armed with all this, we should approach the desert island that was promised in the title of the lecture. And the desert island comes from a journal called, I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, Chautauquan, probably. There was an American movement of making science popular in the 19th century, which was called Chautauqua. I think it's probably a word from a Native American language. And they published this journal. And in the June number of 1883, there was a letter from one of the readers asking a question. If a tree were to fall on an island where there were no human beings, would there be any sound? And the editors of Chautauquan answered very correctly, no. Sound is the sensation excited in the ear when the air or other medium is set in motion. So when the wind falls a tree on a desert island, there is no sound if nobody is observing. Now, I think this is a really good moment or a really good point from where to approach the ontological problems, because we have three problems here, actually. We have the tree problem, the sound problem, and we also have the wind problem. The tree problem. Where does the tree begin and where does it end? We normally say that the tree has, roots, trunk, branches, and leaves. If we were very, very small, smaller than a microbe, 1,000,000 times smaller than a microbe, but we would still be somewhere on this leaf, we may not be able to discern quite clearly where the leaf ends and, air begins. There is a constant, transmission of oxygen molecules and some other stuff coming in and so on. So it would rather be like a mist where the tree ends. Same thing at the roots, where, nutrients are entering and things reorganizing themselves and so on. But even when we are slightly bigger, as big as we ourselves are, for example, what about the insects who are living in the bark of the tree? For example, Peter has done multiple studies of these, how do you call them in English? These bark beetles, yes, making their traces, in the tree and so on. So the tree remembers how the bark beetles have dug their channels there and so on. So are the bark beetles a part of the tree or not? Well, probably not. Are the trails of the bark beetles a part of the tree? They obviously are. So there is also a question of borders here. Now, thinking of our own organisms, when we eat, you think you digest your food yourself? You have millions of bacteria in your stomach doing the job for you. Are these bacteria a part of you or not? If they are a part of you, are they a part of you in the same way how your heart is a part of you? Or are they not? Is the viruses, are the viruses that penetrate our organisms and make them behave and be in different ways, are they a part of us or not? Well, if you eat a carrot, when does this carrot become a part of you? All these questions, all unsolved. If we want to think of the tree as a separate object with all other objects, distinctly there in some kind of conceptual space. But that is not all. The tree problem also involves a change, because the tree was not always as we see it. It was not always in the way how the wind fell it on that desert island. It may have been a seedling once, Every oak was once an acorn. So at which point exactly does the acorn become an oak? There is a trail, a trajectory of how acorns change into oaks, but you cannot pinpoint and say, well, it was on the 26th of August 2021 when this particular acorn became this particular oak. Now you can say, well, okay, let's take this, let's separate this oak tree into a process and say, well, at this moment where it is an acorn, we can already say like it is going to become an oak, possibly, but it may become a pig. Because pigs, eat acorns and they digest them, and we just recently said that this carrot becomes a part of us. So why doesn't this acorn become a part of that pig which eats it? So processually, it is very difficult to say that this acorn becomes an oak, and that and this is kind of conceptually clear. Now, from here, we can move to the sound problem. We noticed, as the editors of Chautauquan have told us, that there is no sound until the wave hits an ear or another apparatus which can register the sound. And then the sound is actually the meeting of a certain wave and a certain surface to which this wave hits and produces an event, which we call the sound. So a sound is a point of meeting, a meeting place, an event, rather than something that exists apart from us. Well, we know that. But this is not as, it's even more complicated than that, because we know that we can discern certain sounds, but then there are sounds which we do not hear, so they are not technically really sounds, infrasounds and ultrasounds, because our ears do not register these. There are other beings and apparatuses which can register these. So what qualifies as a sound is also dependent on the characteristics of the apparatus, so the characteristics of the recipient. And this applies to our entire apparatus of senses. For example, we see colors in a certain way. Horses see colors in quite a different way. As you can see in the picture, there is the same thing that a rider with a horse must jump through. The rider sees something quite different than the horse sees. So we cannot say that things have, really color, that they are characterized by color or by sound or by anything else. So how can we approach things at all? To add to this, we have scale. We have a certain size which comes with our apparatus of senses. We see certain things which as small and others as big, but there we can very well imagine a perspective which sees these small things as really, really big. And we can also imagine a perspective which sees these big things as really, really small. Add to this the moment of speed. We think that, we compare how things move to our own movements, our own capacity of movement. We don't see some things because they move too quickly. Some other things we think that, oh, they are always there, mountains. They don't move. Oh, they do. It's just that they move so slowly that we don't notice. Therefore, the particularity of our apparatus of senses and makes our world picture, the structures of the world that we consider to be natural and permanent, makes very particular to us. We need this apparatus of senses. Everybody does. And we're navigating through our environment through it. It's just that when we speak about a world consisting of objects, it's that we posit that what our apparatus sees is the way how things really are. Well, if that isn't anthropocentrism, what is? Think of navigating the environment as bats do. Think of how, slime mold navigates their environment. Think of how flies. Well, I would really probably there are some chemicals which would enable me to experience space and my environment as flies do. The eye of the fly, well, we have two, and we synthesize a sort of a three-dimensional picture with the three eyes. Imagine having, several thousand eyes looking in all directions and synthesizing those into a kind of like a simultaneously working like 3D picture. And now think of the speed with which the fly flies. Well, I can walk, 5 kilometers an hour, and I'm, approximately 2 meters long, so you can calculate how many of my natural lengths I could do per second. Now compare this with what the fly does through the space with, the 3D experience, constantly ongoing. And then you think, okay, objects, real, now. But it's still not all with the sound. We need memory. Because if we just stop time for a moment and think of, is there a sound in a single moment, even if there is an ear, the moment of hitting, the moment when the wave hits the air, you need to have a memory of what has happened before. You need to understand the sound in terms of time, but what is in the past is not there any longer. It has ceased to be. It may exist as memory for you, but it has ceased to be. So, for example, music is only possible because we have memory and we can put together sounds that we remember, events that we remember with the events that are taking place at this particular moment. There is time, memory, everything that is involved for a sound to exist. So now we go to the wind problem. What does the word wind refer to? There is no such thing as the wind. We would say that wind is the fact of multiple particles which make up the air moving together in a certain direction. So the wind is most decisively an event. There is no such thing as wind. There is only the event. None of these particles separately are the wind. Without these particles, there is also no wind. The fact of the movement is what the word wind refers to. Just as sound refers to the frequency of the motion, the wind refers to the fact of movement of the particles of air. But then when we say that the tree fell down because of the wind, it is the wind that has causal agency here. It is not that any of these particles of air would be able to just take the tree down on the desert island. You need to have the wind, you need to have the event, the movement, the assembly. What we see is that the question to the editors of Chautauquan opens up a really, really large ensemble of problems which each refer to each single existent in some particular way. We're speaking about mountains moving around. Normally, naturally, we would think of that mountains, well, these are these sort of things, solid, kind of existing things. And clouds, well, clouds, they're ephemeral, they come and go, they form and so on. But basically, it's just a question of speed of being. Mountains are, the speed of being of mountains is just much slower than the speed of being of clouds. Otherwise, there is no real difference. So all things suffer from the same three problems. They are all extracted from their network of relations to other things in their environment and so on. They are extracted from this processual constant becoming and change. And without this processual becoming and change, they're not the same. The self-sameness of these things is posited in the way how they appear to our senses. Our very particular sense separators rarely to be met in nature. The structures of the natural world, they correspond to our scale and our speed of being and not anybody else's. And the concepts that we say that describe these things, they refer to temporary patterns, they refer to events of different causal flows coming together for a certain time, and not to self-same entities of any form. So things are just relevant, highlighted stages of processes, relevant for us and highlighted by our attention as the sense apparatus presents them to us. Reality, at the same time, does not consist of things, but it consists mostly of all kinds of interim stages, these gray zones between highlighted stages of processes. When you walk on a dark street and there are lanterns hanging, there is a sphere of light here, we are here, then we walk another 20, 40 meters, there is another sphere of light, and then there is this scale of gray, where it's coming grayer, darker, and then it's coming lighter and lighter again. So I would say that the existence of things consists of all of it, not just the highlighted stages of acorn, oak, but everything also that is in between. But Graham Harman is entirely correct in saying that not everything is as important that happens to us. Not everything is as relevant for us. There are stages that transform the pattern of things beyond recognition. But whether something new emerges as a new thing, this depends on which form this reality takes, how relevant it is for us humans. Do we need a concept for it? Do we need an idea to describe it? If we do, we usually invent it, and then we say, well, this is a thing. Discussion, for example, is a thing. It's not just random people coming together and starting to talk to each other. It is a certain thing. It may have even a beginning and end, therefore, the idea of gradualism, which I endorse, does not exclude the idea of thresholds, of maybe water melting into, or water dissolving into gas, or freezing into ice. It's still somehow the same water, but it has passed a certain threshold. Things, therefore, do not have necessary continuity. We were speaking about carrots before. Observe the circle. There is a carrot. Some of it has been grated, some of it not yet. So is the grated carrot the same carrot as the ungrated carrot? We could say that these grated and ungrated carrots, they have substance continuity. The grated stage of the carrot consists of the same substance that the ungrated carrot consisted of. It's just like the pattern has been changed. Then we say that yes, it is the same carrot. It is the same substance. Now, look at the bigger picture, the car. Well, there is a substance continuity between a car and a wreck, but it is not the same thing because the relevance. We cannot drive a wreck. We can eat a grated carrot. We cannot drive a wreck. There is a substance continuity here, but the pattern is continuity has been disrupted. So normally, when we speak about objects, they have both substance continuity in time and pattern continuity in time. But what I would like to point out is that these continuities correspond to which of the stages are relevant, how we observe them. There are no binaries. There is a gray zone in it with thresholds, a gradualism of change which doesn't necessarily need all that continuity. Now, the binaries that we are talking about are always, they're very useful, conceptually very useful, but it's not where reality is at. You never have a pure binary of either kind. We're talking about life and non-life, for example. What about viruses? Biologists would tell you that viruses are not alive. I beg to differ. I think that they have a kind of life which is not the sort of superior form of life, but it is also not non-life in the sense that stones are not alive. Even stones, I mean, like they have a certain potential too. I would rather say that instead of having binaries, we should think of being on a continuum, on a gradient, all the time where everything that is has all these same potentials in a certain degree. This degree can be smaller, this degree or lower, this can be higher, but we never find anything that corresponds to an endpoint of a gradient or purity in any form. You were probably taught what water is chemically, right? H2O. And then you're told that people need to drink water in order to stay alive. Wrong. When people only drink H2O, they die, because H2O takes the minerals from their organism and takes them out, and they become incapable of living. What we drink as water contains lots of other stuff beside H2O, and it is the an ensemble, the togetherness of all this stuff that makes drinking water necessary and useful. So what does it tell us about life and consciousness then? I would say that neither life nor consciousness is a binary, that we cannot say that there is this point when not living acorn becomes living oak, but there is a gradient there as well. And the same with consciousness, that there are stages of consciousness which are more conscious and less conscious, but it is not possible for us to say that at this point exactly consciousness arises and it wasn't there before and becomes. Now, the opposite of life is usually death. But as it was told before, and as numerous thinkers before me have pointed out, death of a person is not the end of the life process. It is just the continuation of life with different means, to paraphrase Clausewitz. The opposite of life, borrowing from Teresa Brennan here, is that life is the death is the state that can generate nothing new. Death is the state which can only go on generating itself, more and more of itself, all the time. Brennan uses this definition to show that capitalism is the machine to change everything into the production of death, something into a form of being which can only regenerate itself with perhaps minor adjustments or permutations of elements. You know, like in a supermarket where bread was once, there is now milk, and milk is where bread was before, but that doesn't mean that there is something new. It just means that the things are redistributed. A much better definition of life has been offered by the Japanese biologist Fukuoka Shinichi, who says that life is a continuously self-upsetting balance. Life is a balance that needs to upset itself in order to be. It needs to unsettle itself. It needs to dislodge itself from its own tracks in order to go on. Therefore, we can actually say that the opposite of death in Brennan's sense, is not life but diversity. Diversity, the differences, the emergence of things that were never before, the reconfigurations which produce situations that are not reproductions, faithful reproductions of what has happened before or what was there before, but which are genuinely new. This is what life does, and this is what diversity is needed for, because whenever we have a difficult question, it is very useful for us to have a multiplicity of possible respondents who can tell us what they think would be a good idea to do. Human, non-human, people in the past, people around us, animals, plants, everybody else with whom, to whom we can relate and with whom we can interact. So, diversity as the opposite of death. Thank you for listening.